Hey, everybody. We're just getting everyone settled and admitted, so just give us one moment. I'm flying solo this evening, so I'll be trying to do the tech over on Facebook and here on Zoom. So please do please do be patient with me while I navigate all of this. All right. I think we're ready to go. Well, I'm so glad I can see some familiar names here in the audience. It's always lovely to see. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so happy that you could join us for this virtual event. This one is called From Hope Chests to Museums, How Women Saved the West. As always, our hope is that through these virtual events, you'll continue to get to know us, the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission, and learn more about our mission to support the Texas Historical Commission in its preservation efforts across the state. Many of you have chosen to support us with donations through these events, for which we are so grateful. Thank you. That really means so much to us. I want to acknowledge our THC commissioners, our Friends board members, as well as some of our colleagues from the Texas Historical Commission who are here with us tonight. We're happy to see you. I'm Christy Poliquin, the development manager for the Friends. If you haven't already followed us on social media, please do so. We'd love to connect with you, and this is also how you can find out about future events and other programming, like our next virtual event, Painted Churches of Texas Part 2, Community and Preservation. Some of you may remember that we did Painted Churches of Texas Part 1 in February of this year. Well, we're back with a Part 2. This one's going to be a little different in that we're not going to have just one presenter or two presenters, but three. So three professional people who are working in history, preservation and conservation, and even an author. So join us for that event. We'll have the Honorable Judge Ed Janica, Conservator Robert Alden Marshall, and author Anthony Head. And we'll also be joined by our presenter from our first presentation, which is a THC staff member who is the coordinator of the Historical Markers Program, Bob Brinkman. So do join us for that. That will be a really special virtual event. A few housekeeping items before we introduce today's speaker. And let me let in some more folks from our waiting room. There we go. We always appreciate it if you can keep your microphones on mute. That just helps us all focus on our presenter. And after the recording, so after tonight's presentation, I will send you an email. It'll probably be tomorrow afternoon, but I'll send everyone. I will also include a list of any book recommendations or websites that our presenter mentions tonight. I'll include all that in the email. So don't worry about trying to hurry up and jot things down during the presentation. There's no need for that. I know I'm always the person that's trying to hurry up and write things down, but yes. Okay, so the run of show for tonight is that we'll have, eventually I will stop talking and I will turn it over to our presenter, who will present on how women help save the West for about 30 to 40 minutes. And then afterwards, we'll have time for question and answer. So while the presentation is going on, if you want to go ahead and put questions into the chat box, that will help us make a queue of questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can when the presentation is over. Okay, it's now my privilege to introduce our presenter. As you may know, the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission's motto is preserving the real places and the real stories of Texas. Tonight's event takes us to the Panhandle to examine the role women played in preserving stories of our past. Born in Lubbock, Texas, graduate of Plainview High School, Texas Tech University, West Texas A&M University, and resident of Amarillo and Canyon, Renea Dauntes is a bona fide Texan and proud daughter of the state's famous Panhandle. Despite growing up disinterested in the region's history, she's come to revel in the tales forged by pioneers. As a result of her newfound respect for those who settled the region, she discovered an interesting pattern that revealed a surprising yet consistent source of historical narratives. Now serving as a research assistant and archivist for the Panhandle-Plains Historical Museum, she's been able to see how women in the West played integral parts in saving information and artifacts from the past, and how they helped get that material to the present. This led her to realize that she is part of a long line of keepers. I love that word. Armed with the knowledge that each person forms a link in the chain from the past to the present to the future. Renea spends much of her time advocating for personal and public archives by helping others see the importance of their own history. We are so excited to hear from you tonight, Renea, and I will hand over the mic to you and let you go ahead with your presentation.
All right, well then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us to the fun stuff. All right, can everybody see that screen okay?
Looks great.
Can you see it, Christy? Okay,
yep,
great.
Looks great.
All right, well, hello and welcome everyone. You're not going to really get to see my face today, but I'm not the one that's really important. It's the women that saved the West that are important tonight. So I do want to start by saying a special thank you to Wes Reeves for putting me in touch with the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission, and for the Friends, and especially Christy, for allowing me the opportunity to share my research with a large audience. As she said, my name is Renea Dauntes, and I am an archivist and an artist. And I'm at currently the Panhandle-Plains Historical Museum, where we get to have all of the fun in the research center. And so, yeah, here we go. Let's jump in. Oh, the tales a trunk could tell. When I was younger, we would occasionally get the chance to see something secured within the large chest steadfastly positioned at the foot of my parents' bed. My mom's hope chest was more of a furniture object, usually serving as a table for a small rack of books. And since it was typically serving a secondary function, we didn't get to look in it very often. And as a kid, with anything rarely done and coupled with extreme care, this type of thing frequently became entangled in mystery. So each time Mom answered the question with, "I don't remember, but it's in my cedar chest," that simple wooden box grew more powerful. It held secrets we wouldn't dare explore without Mom there to guide us. This hope chest held the memories that my mom had lost in the chaos of life. Most often, Mom would actually eventually recall the answers she'd been asked for, but on the rare occasion she needed help remembering, we knew where she would go. And we, my sister and I, my brother was around sometimes too, but it's usually the girls that are the nosiest, we were right there on our heels. With the lid open and the scent of cedar filling the air, we watched as this treasure chest gave up the story of our family's past. My family's story is not a unique one. The idea of a family's history being held within a sacred or secure box in order to pass down the treasures from one generation to another is extremely common. Some of you may have a hope chest that your mother had or grandmother. Maybe you've even started one for yourself. Each one of those boxes represents a way in which someone has saved parts of history. Very often, it's women who have had those boxes and kept passing them from one generation to the next. And it's just one of the many ways that women save the West. Now, before jumping too far into the heart of the material, it might be interesting to know a few things about me, just so it's a little clearer what my journey led to this path and this particular project. From an early age, I wanted to be an archaeologist, forever burying and exhuming little green army men from my mother's flower bed. My bachelor's degree is from Texas Tech University, where I trained as an archaeologist, and I had the pleasure of working in the field and the lab for Lubbock Lake Landmark. It was the happiest I'd ever been, and even though we did have to get up at 4:30 in the morning just to be there before the sun got too terribly hot, it was what I loved to do. My family kept me in the area, and I moved to Amarillo. I didn't have the opportunity to dig in the dirt again, so I had to find other jobs to keep me busy. And in the fall of 2012, I met Scott Hyde. a photographer that once lived in New York City, and he told me he needed a little help organizing some pictures. Little did I know that there were thousands of images spanning 70 years of his career. They're haphazardly piled on every flat surface waiting for me at his house. Over the course of the 9 years until Scott's passing in 2021, at the age of 95, I had become his archivist and companion. I worked on sorting, cataloging, and digitizing his body of work, a task which continues to this day, and I'm not really sure if I'll ever be done. But I do persist, and it did change my life forever. It was this freelance job turned lifestyle that put me on my path to ultimate happiness. Archival work uses a similar set of skills needed for archaeology, and I happen to be fairly good at them. Extreme attention to detail, awareness of broad connections, and meticulous record keeping all play a part in both ARC careers. While working for Scott, I found that I had a strong desire to save things, all the things. I would see letters or photos in antique shops and feel compelled to rescue these orphaned objects. Over time, the archive at large began to form, and now it is an organism of its own. While managing the two archives, I pursued my master's degree at West Texas A&M University, and in 2017, I had the remarkable opportunity to intern at PPHM, which means I paid to work at the archive as a student, and then I stayed on as a student worker when they did finally pay me. And 2.5 years ago, I officially joined staff, and I've been very privileged to do so. This last semester, I actually completed my thesis project, an exhibition on how women saved the West, and graduated with my master's degree in history. You can see it was a long time coming, and the look on my face probably says it all. This project began loosely by chance and largely by necessity. The death of a loved one prompted a rummage through an old iron ammo box that my grandmother, Nana, kept her important things in. We were on the hunt for old photos, these photos. At my museum job, they had recently been talking a lot about Hattie Anderson, and we'll hear more about her later. But the main driving force for this entire project came about as an attempt to get a scholarship. And sending in all the applications I could, I eventually came to the Center for the Study of the American West, or CSAW. I answered all the traditional questions until the last one, which tripped me up a bit. And the question was roughly, how will your research examine the American West? At that time, my research was focused on the phenomenal human and extraordinary photographer, Scott Hyde. I had absolutely no idea what would apply to the American West. The only thing I could think of was that he shifted from an urban landscape to a rural one when he moved from New York City to Amarillo. But I will be the very first to admit that that sounded kind of flimsy, especially for what they like to focus on. At the time, I was also working as a student worker for PPHM, so I had been working on collections, one of which was a collection of photographs from a local man. And then very shortly before making these applications, I'd been given a new task that was a mountain of information, some of which were photographs, others were documents and all sorts of things related to a ranch. Slowly, I thought about how people dealt with the masses of information that eventually wound up in our hands at the museum and the research center. And that's when the seed was formed. Who was saving the information? Who was responsible for the items and information that told the story of this area? Hattie Anderson was the founder of Panhandle-Plains Historical Society, and she had been, like I said, a topic of conversation. And it was me that was preserving Scott's body of work, and my mother had tubs of photos in her closet, and all of those came to mind. And that's when I had a hypothesis. Women made really great collectors. Like many with an artistic bent, procrastination had been a defining character trait my entire life. So when I say I waited until the last day to apply for scholarships and only had about 8 hours until the deadline, this should shock no one. In the course of about 2 hours, I made a decision to state the hypothesis that women were the driving force behind much of the information we have available to us for historic study. They may have sensed that this was a hasty assertion, and I did not receive that particular scholarship. And for that, I'm actually quite grateful. In the intervening years, I've had an incredible experience exploring the idea. What I didn't expect was the overwhelming confirmation of my hypothesis. Had I gotten the scholarship, I would have studied it a bit, seen that it was accurate, and then gone on. Like any seed, it needed time to grow. Ultimately, coming full circle, Seesaw was a major contributor to the exhibition at Cornett Library earlier this year. And along with the Gender Studies program at WT and some work from several individuals, I was able to share this very personal and meaningful research with many people. Today, you join those who will see the fruits of that tree, once a tiny seed that has now blossomed. All right, so this project itself is comprised of 4 major components, and stick with me, we don't want anybody to get lost. It is how, that's the first one, women, that's the second, saved 3, and the West 4. I know that is really too obvious, but honestly, many people haven't really taken the time to focus on exactly how this happened. So really, the how focuses on the methods used to preserve information and artifacts from the past. The next part is pretty self-explanatory, but specifically, this speaks to the preponderance of women as the primary source gatherers. These individuals served as the conduits of information. They were the keepers. They were the savers. So that third part, the saving part. And lastly, the West. The idea of the West is extremely broad. First, parameters had to be set, so meaningful conclusions had to be drawn. And the West is a very big place. So I just decided to pick an arbitrary area and drew a rectangle, basically around the Panhandle-Plains region. And I used that as my focus. However, there is a lot of work to be done, and going beyond the Panhandle-Plains region is something that hopefully I will at least intrigue some of you maybe to join me on, because there's so much more that needs to be done. Here are some of the examples I used in my exhibition to show how women preserved information. And as you can see, there are a variety of forms, some of which will be talked more specifically about here in just a little bit. This paper doll comes from the exhibit, and it reminds us of how connected we are to each category of saver. There are the originators, who are the primary link in the chain of historical knowledge. They include women from all walks of life. Economic status did not have a profound effect on the ability to preserve and pass on a family's history from one generation to the next. As a matter of fact, lower socioeconomic environments could produce mountains of information because the items being cared for were rarer and therefore more precious to family members. Some examples of originators include letter writers and journal keepers, scrapbook makers, data recorders, quilters, savers, storytellers, authors, artists, and collectors. Next, we have the caretakers, those women who kept and protected material that was passed down from the originators. This group of women serves as a connection, as a conduit between then and now. There could be a single link or a long twisted chain spanning generations entrusted with the care of artifacts and information. Finally, there are the stewards, women in unique positions who made it possible to preserve and present information and artifacts, often given by caregivers to honor those originators. These women are responsible for many of the institutions we look to today for historical information. Over the years, they have served as board chairs, curators, historians, advocates, archivists, volunteers, directors, fundraisers, educators, and so much more. Looking now at the saved portion of the phrase, as with all information, there must be a conduit from one place to another, and this can be viewed as the primary function of how information and artifacts were delivered from the past to the present. Utilizing objects such as hope chests, boxes, trunks, and old iron ammo boxes, items were kept safe as they travel along the timeline and through generational hands. Archives, libraries, museums, and historical societies also gathered, protected, and presented material. In our modern era, we now have a variety of rapidly changing technological conduits to preserve information, especially items that are now what we call digital, born digital. So much of the information we utilize today has relied heavily on the existence of these conduits to ensure continuity and provenance. As stated before, the West is a pretty broad term. For my master's project, I limited the area to the Panhandle-Plains region. In this map, you can see parts of Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Looking a little closer, I'm going to outline where we were in Texas, and it included information from all of these counties in Texas. This group out of New Mexico, a couple from Colorado, some from Kansas, and then into Oklahoma. I wanted to be able to have a large and varied area in which to work with, and it actually wound up being very beneficial. There was a lot of really great women to study in all of these states. The next part, though, is the beyond. In my initial research for this project, when the geographic parameters had yet to be set, I found several instances of women who were instrumental in early documentation and preservation all over the Western territories, long before state boundaries were formed. Future researchers, myself included, need to focus on this other parts of the West and eventually cover it in its entirety. Women who made notable contributions should be recognized for their efforts, and I do intend on expanding my horizons a bit for in future reference research. I also invite others to join me as we discover more women who have saved the West. And now we'll look a little at why the phenomenon worked and how it blossomed when it did. When we pick up a book with a historical subject, we only see the final link in a long chain. Rarely do we immediately envision the smith that forged the first anchoring link. Hardly ever do we think of that initial forging smith as being in a skirt. Of course, it isn't that women can't wear pants. It's just that when many of the artifacts that helped preserve the details of the Old West were collected, that was the style. Numerous factors led to the capacity for women to significantly impact the historical record. A generalized tendency towards sentimental connections helped secure the retention of letters, photos, journals, and other primary documents. Traditionally, the transference of these items was between mothers and daughters, creating the first links from the past well into the future. As decades pass, material has the tendency to accumulate, as many of you are probably very aware. Frequently, these family treasures are seen as important, but perhaps a little burdensome. And having a place to collect family documents and possibly share the history within them became new projects with the potential to serve communities. Due to the innate ability to organize and execute multifaceted plans, women were often at the forefront of organizing institutions to house just such collections. During certain eras, women were not encouraged to pursue traditional employment, and this freedom allowed many women to put their industrious natures to good use by volunteering. Overwhelmingly, the rosters of founding members for the museums, historical societies, and libraries in the Panhandle-Plains region were filled with women. They are the next link makers. They were joining those original bits and pieces up with other accounts and information to create a lasting tether to the past. As organizations and institutions grew, the common theme continued. Across the board, female members fill significant numbers of staff and volunteer roles that keep institutions going all the way up to today. And of course, this claim is not that men did nothing. Absolutely not. And there was, however, a clear and distinct feeling that women have played a vital role in the preservation of historical artifacts and information by keeping primary documents, assembling artifacts, and furthering preservation and presentation of historical objects. Women have saved the West. How did they do that? The exhibit earlier this year displayed items that typified the methods of preservation. I'll share some of those here, and thanks to technology, highlight some of the items I didn't have room for in the physical exhibit. So if you were there that night, thank you for rejoining. Hopefully you'll get to see some new things. And for those of you that this is your first time, there's gonna be a lot to look at. Writing is the most readily thought of method when we think of how information gets saved. Letters, postcards, books, both fact and fiction alike, family records, journals, diaries, calendars, and oh, so much more make up the majority of primary source material used to craft the historical narrative. Here we have examples of newspaper articles written by some of the ladies we'll talk about later, family Bible, journals, correspondence that's been saved, and some fiction and nonfiction works. Visual arts allow us to have a glimpse of the past in unique ways. Paintings and illustrations can provide vital clues to flora, fauna, and even geographic changes that we may not be able to see today. These images come from Olive Vandruff on the left, Glenna Goodacre, who is a sculptress, and she is actually from the Lubbock area. And I went to Texas Tech, so there's a bunch of her sculptures on our campus that I love very much. And then lastly, one of my absolute favorites from Georgia O'Keeffe is the Night Train in the Desert. And it is an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous piece, but each one shows a bit about the region and how those women saw it. Everything from quilts to cookbooks can help paint a picture of the way people lived in a certain time period. Clues about rationing, environmental effects, and regional prosperity can be drawn from the examination of things like handmade blankets, recipes, and other ephemera. For example, in these particular photos, you have cookbooks that were created by a local Christian alliance that was a part of the Lubbock Christian University. Then you've got a couple of cake recipes. You've got a war rations book with not all of the rations having been taken in. And then these quilts actually come from members of my own family. And so those can tell stories as well, whether the material that they made up of or the way that the stitches were done. In many ways, these were done, especially quilting, in oral traditions where they would be able to tell a story, to communicate an actual history in sharing the blanket. Technology has advanced significantly, and even while we sit here, new ways of capturing sound are probably being developed. Records that could be made at home are real treasures. Sending your voice to a loved one miles away to be played over and over again was a special treat. These pictures, called recordiograms, carry Christmas greetings and a very sweet interview between two childhood friends, two girls. And then the programs by the USO that were set up in World War II allowed soldiers to send letters, spoken letters, home. And what a comfort it would have been to have those who could hear your voice of their loved one while they were away during war. Before the advent of burning CDs, but after the fragile technology of recordiograms, the humble cassette took its place in aiding the capture of voices from the past. In some cases, they captured oral history interviews, like we have many, many of at Panhandle-Plains Historical Museum. Some cases, it caught someone's first words, and in some cases, their very last. The microcassette in this image actually holds the audio love letter from a teenager to her high school sweetheart. Digital material can now be found on anything from a 3.5 floppy disk And yes, we still have things that can read those because there is some material on those that are still important. CDs, and now very commonly we have those flash drives that so many of us have just rattling around in our pockets and desk drawers. The fascination with capturing images has not waned in the 2 centuries since attempts were first made in earnest. Whether there are piles of boxes with pictures all inside them, to fat scrapbooks with rosy-cheeked kiddos, or a phone that has over 20,000 snapshots in them, photographs remain one of the very best sources of documentary evidence of the past. Another really good example comes in the form of scrapbooks. And who better to chronicle the passage of a school year than a teacher who cares for her students? Creating scrapbooks would form the basis for early yearbooks in this region. And in some of the collections we have at the museum, for example, there is a teacher named Alice Gertie Smith. She was meticulous about preserving her students' photographs, and they basically were the yearbooks for them in those years. Later, schools would organize official publications for students to scribble notes onto at the end of the year, and for the rest of us to dread looking at after they reached a certain age. And my high school, my senior year, yearbook is actually the red one in the center image there, and no one got to open it. So I still dread looking at mine as well. Every one of these artifacts had to find a way from their primary source to the present, and actions of the originators led the artifacts into the hands of those caretakers. These caretakers often became stewards themselves, or they supported the organizations and institutions who took up the mission to preserve material that would eventually help establish the history of this region. There is a world of information in myriad forms. This material gets put away in boxes, folders, safety deposit boxes, tubs, albums, iron, ammo boxes, you name it. I'm sure you all have an astonishing amount of that material at home. But over time, these materials accumulate in people's homes, libraries, and in museums, as well as other institutions. So now we're going to take a look at some of the individual women who helped save the West. That large collection I mentioned at the opening of today's talk was the Trigg collection. This was a massive body of material that spanned 3 generations of women that had been working on and around the ranch. The collection consisted of 25 boxes that include everything from check stubs, receipts, and logs for the ranch to personal letters, photos, and art made by the youngest Triggs. Bess Trigg, the originator in this case, passed this material to her daughters, and then her granddaughters later took charge of not only the material, but the ranch, and is still in family hands in New Mexico. This long line of women was one of the primary inspirations to me and for this project of How Women Save the West. Lola Grace Erdman was the author of over 20 fiction works. Erdman was an honored writer, educator for Amarillo Independent School District and at the West Texas State College, teaching English there. She was a writer in residence, and her works, though they are a fiction, strongly reveal very accurate portrayals of frontier life. She came to Amarillo in the 1920s and was a member of the very well established Panhandle Pen Women's Group, which many of the women in this area belonged to initially. Jo Stewart Randall was the driving force behind the Carson County Square House Museum in Panhandle, Texas. She motivated the local community and lobbied legislators to support the museum and made sure that she was able to ensure this accurate depiction of life in her area. There is one instance where she and many other women of this historical society went out and did oral interviews, and then Jo Stewart went, Joe went and typed them up all of herself to make sure they were done accurately, and they still have those available there at the museum today. It is a remarkable woman who was the spearheading of this institution. Artists like Isabel Robinson, Georgia O'Keeffe, and Olive Vandriff Bugby captured the many facets of life in the Panhandle Plains region. Isabel was one of the early art educators in the history of West Texas State Teachers College. And that's the third name that I've mentioned that is West Texas. So there's been a lot of changes, but everybody's basically WT, just the early forms in this case. Isabel served from 1927 to 1960. During her tenure, she created her own works depicting the region, as well as encouraging the capture of the West through visual arts. For 6 summers, starting in 1936, she organized the Paladuro School of Art, where visiting artists would teach students the skills needed to encapsulate the beauty of the area. Georgia O'Keeffe, of course, the more famous of the 3 of these women, called the region home twice. 1912 to 1914, she was an art educator in the Amarillo schools, and in 1916, she returned, going to Canyon to teach in the art department of West Texas State Normal College. It's name number 4 if anyone's counting. She left in 1918, moving to pursue her art career, and eventually she would live at her beloved Ghost Ranch in Abiquiu, New Mexico, where she would continue to capture the spirit of the West. And on the far right, Olive Vandriff Bugby, the woman who had painted that absolutely beautiful bird in the visual arts section. She was a self-taught artist born in Ohio and became a prolific commercial illustrator. Not only did she lend her drafting skills to the storytelling of the history of the West, she created many splendid watercolors of the native flora and fauna. After the death of her second husband, Harold Dow Bugby, which some of you may be familiar with his name because he does have murals in the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum's Pioneer Hall. After his death, she took over his position as the art curator at the museum, where she would serve for nearly 20 years. In this 1963 image, Olive is showing off a painting by a younger hunter of a Native American woman with a Pueblo building in the background, and you can see she is brimming with light. She loved what she did there at the museum. Louise Daniel and Sherry Atkins are 2 phenomenal photographers who have turned their lenses toward the beauty of this region. Sherry is actually currently a working photographer, and many of her amazing photographs come out of Paladuro Canyon. Louise Daniel was an educator and left a legacy of not only beauty in her photography, but also a lifelong love of learning. And there's a luncheon for her each year that honors her dedication to education. And she left an amazing legacy, and her papers are at the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum's Research Center as well. And the photographs in there are absolutely tremendous and do a very good job of documenting the region that she called home. As writers, both Dorothy Scarborough and Laura Hamner contributed to the understanding of the struggles and triumphs of those settling in the West. Living in New York City at the time, teaching at Columbia when she published, Dorothy wrote and published The Wind in 1925 and published anonymously. 2 stories are proffered as to why she didn't publish anonymously. Both have to do with backlash, but one is capitalizing on it and the other is trying to avoid it. So you kind of get to pick which one you think is the real one. But what a lot of people didn't understand who read the book, that Dorothy actually was very familiar with the environment in which she set her novel. She spent years in Sweetwater, Texas in her adolescence, and therefore knew the winds of the West Texas plains very, very well. I actually have an image of my copy of the first edition of The Wind. And the day I purchased this, I was in Lubbock, Texas. And you can see a very, very, very large flag completely at attention because the wind that day was doing what it does best. And boy, was it blowing. And the very first few lines of her book begin the the, the best way I can describe it is the wind is the main character. And the first line is, the wind was the cause of it all. And if any of you live in this West Texas area, anywhere on the plains, you can probably vouch for Dorothy and her belief that the wind caused it all. It is a fantastic book and full of murder and mayhem, and you would very much enjoy it. And I encourage you to get your own copy of The Wind or check it out from your library, or come see us. We have a copy that you can read and sit in their research center and do so. Laura Hamner, she's seen there on the right. She was an avid history collector and a phenomenal storyteller. She was a radio personality and a prominent newspaper figure. She wrote 1001 radio programs called Light and Hitch, which means sit down and stay a while, basically. And she told the tale of hundreds of pioneers in Texas and Oklahoma. She was an educator and enthusiastic traveler, always happy to share her stories with the young and old alike. Some of her newspaper titles were Spinster on the Prowl, which is one of my favorites because she was unmarried and did not have any of her own children, but she did adopt. But then there was Talks with Teens. She did a feature on place names. And then, of course, Light and Hitch. You'll see the No Gun Man of Texas is the book that she wrote about Charles Goodnight and his time there in Texas, that was eventually adopted by the state legislature for the schools. So it was an official school book at one point. And in the photograph, you can see Laura with her binders and binders and binders full of information, which I've had the privilege of processing myself. So it is an incredible wealth of knowledge and an incredible experience just to be able to sit and read some of these stories that she collected over those many, many, many years. She lived in the Herring Hotel. It's where the photograph is taken. And she remained a very strong advocate for history her entire life. This is Juanita Wynn in the center there. And she was known as Nana to her grandchildren and Granny to anyone else she met. And she was a keeper, filling an old iron ammo box with gifted photos, greeting cards, and clippings from years and years of interactions showed just how much she loved and felt pride in her family and her friends. So a lot of the material that was in this exhibition, some of it displayed there in that the top left-hand side there, it all came out of this ammo box that Nana would keep her belongings in. And that's a picture of it from the very top when I cracked it open after it had been closed for a while. The jewelry box in the photo has her mother's rings, a charm bracelet from an enthusiastic teenage collector, a senior ring, and a necklace passed down from mother to daughter. And these are my personal treasures. My bracelet and my senior ring. That's my mom's necklace and my Nana's rings. They are all very special parts of this project. And I'm very fortunate to be able to say that these are parts of the things that tell the story, our story and the story of the West. Claudia Stewart and Jean Stuntz, two dynamos in their own right, both taught for WT. They teamed up to write a book called African Americans in Amarillo. This book is a vital research tool for those wanting to understand the experiences of the Black community and how it's developed over time, especially in Amarillo. This book is just the beginning, though, and in reality, there is much, much work to be done in the way of collection and preservation of information and artifacts from not only this community, but the Hispanic and Native American community and international refugees. They share the common history, but have little to no voice in the narrative. Next, we have Hattie Anderson, and after accepting a position in the history department of West Texas State Normal College in 1920, she became a passionate educator and advocate for historical preservation in the region. She is known as the driving force behind the creation of the Panhandle-Plains Historical Society and later the creation of its eponymous museum. She got her PhD in 1935 and was one of the very first women on the faculty to do so. Angie Debo, who was a friend of Hattie's, was born in Kansas, moved to Oklahoma in 1899, and spent much of her life and career documenting the people of the region. An early academic, she was a certified teacher by the age of 16. She was a prolific writer and remembered as a tremendous educator. And though her time at West Texas State was fraught with conflict, she was able to make an impact on those who worked with her. She also has the distinction of being the very first curator for the Panhandle-Plains Historical Museum. It's one of the reasons I really, really like her. She was an anthropologist and an incredible writer, and she was a force to be reckoned with. And that's an image of the Panhandle-Plains Historical Museum when it was first built. So that's Pioneer Hall. Now, it is only a matter of time before the current resources that we have are overwhelmed. And as technology increases, there's a dramatic and exponential increase in the amount of material that we can possibly save, keeping in mind that it also must be done judiciously. The more we connect and the more we share, the bigger the picture grows and the more complex the history becomes. The historical narrative is like that of a beautiful tapestry imagined by artists. As the threads are woven into place, the image begins to take shape and we can see more of what is going on in the image. Just like each bobbin holding the thread to complete the image, we are integral to the development of an accurate picture of history. Each life represents a thread, and without it, the tapestry may be relatively discernible. It just isn't complete. And though we can never actually hope to get every single thread, it's important to preserve as many threads as possible in order to have as complete a picture as we can. Therefore, it is up to us. And I hope today that you've enjoyed hearing about some of the many remarkable women who have played key roles and how they were able to help in allowing us to write our history and have that information in order in which to base it. You and I are just like them. The key now isn't just women, but everyone working together to make sure we continue to preserve the information and artifacts and ensure that their past and our present get to the future. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. And there is a tremendous amount of information I couldn't fit into the talk this evening, but I'm absolutely delighted to answer questions and hear your comments, or you can email me at the address that's on screen. And again, Christy's going to transfer that information to you that tomorrow as well. So let's take it back and we can take some comments. Oh, Christy, I can't hear you.
Thank you. You know, it's supposed to come on when you put this down, but sometimes it doesn't work. So I was thinking as you were talking, I was wondering how many people in this audience have their own box of things that they're keeping to pass on, or how many have received that box from a parent. I know I certainly have that box sitting in a closet in my house.
I'd be willing to wager
right?
a good 85 to 90%.
Absolutely.
It is an overwhelming number. When I began this research and started asking people or telling people what I was doing, they go, "Oh, I have one of those. Oh, my mom has one of those. Oh, I'm going to get that when my grandmother moves." Or, oh, this. And it was the same way with institutions. So when I started to investigate the way that women were saving things, creating historical societies was one of the big ones. And so I featured 6 in the exhibit. Panhandle-Plains is one of them. Carson County, I mentioned, and the window on the plains in Dumas, the Carson County, Castro County's museums. There's just so many. And it was typically women getting together and saving these stories and saving this information. And so it is a really high probability that almost everybody in the audience probably has one, I would imagine.
Mhm. I love to think about that because each one of those cases is its own unique story. And I love how that's the story of place and the story of culture and the story of families. It's really interesting. Well, enough of me chit-chatting. We have several questions in the chat that I'm curious what the answers are myself. So let's see. Let me get back to the top of the list here. Dorothy's asking, is any part of the collection of Scott's photos available online?
That is a process. I do have that almost to the point where it will be available to see online, and it's just scotthyde.com. Actually, what I'll do is I will let you know what there's 3 different websites that have material on it that might be pertinent to people. So scotthyde.com, howwomenSaveTheWest.com, and I'm working on that. I needed to finish my master's first. I think that was important to my teachers. I'm kidding. It was important to me, but it was something that needed to be done. And building a website is a lot more difficult than I remember doing it several years ago, which is also why Scott's is taking me a little bit longer because I'm rebuilding it. And then also archiveatlarge.com is where I take those orphaned objects that I had mentioned that I saved, digitize those and put them online. So there's a few that I'll make sure you have the websites too, but
yes,
we'll get them soon.
I will put that in the email that I'll send out tomorrow.
Okay.
Several people had mentioned in the chat that they wanted the recording, and I will be sending that email out tomorrow. Sure. I have been having a lot of trouble with email going to people's junk or spam folders. So if you don't get it by tomorrow, end of day, check your spam folder. But yes, I will try to put all those resources in there. Okay, we have a question from S. Barkley. They are asking, our local historical commission has hundreds of boxes of materials. How do we go about organizing and recording these for the future? We're all volunteers. Are there services available for the task?
Absolutely. So there's some really, really great places to start. So as an archivist, boxes are my favorite thing. And there's a couple of things that I can sort of tell everybody all at once that you can do these things and it makes your life easier in the long run, maybe not easier right away. So the first thing is, do not throw away anything until you've looked at everything. Do not make a decision on whether or not you're going to get rid of some things just because it doesn't look important. I have gotten rid of receipts when later on it turned out that was the day that they purchased this particular work of art that now I have to try to find provenance on. Don't throw away anything until you've looked at everything. So the best thing to do though is to get an idea of who the material came from, when it came into your possession, and then going through a box at a time, making notes. When we go through them in an archive, we process things and we touch things at least twice, usually 3 to 4 times before we're ever even close to being done with a finding aid. So you're going to want to get real personal with everything in those boxes. And that's the fun part. That's the part where you get to make your connections. And that's the part where you dig. That's the archaeologist in me that loves to dig. And so even though you are volunteers, you can do it in a couple ways. You can say, hey, I'm going to take this box and I'm going to look through it, or you do it all, we're all going to come together and we're going to look in this one box first time. But you just have to make some time, make some efforts. Now there's the Society for American Archivists has an amazing set of parameters that you can follow to help you guide. There's actually a book called The Lone Arranger that is really good for that sort of thing. That's what I was when I started for Scott, and that you can get that through the Society of Southwest, or the Society of American Archivists. And then there's actually a Society of Southwest Archivists, which they're also a wonderful resource for. So just depending on where your historical society is at, you've got places that you can start. And honestly, you can email me. I'll send you some recommendations. I'm happy to talk about that sort of thing anytime. And I do it. I consult for people, and that's what I ultimately want to do, is help families and help other smaller organizations that don't have on staff archivists or historians to be able to save their information and the material. So yeah, so long story short, don't throw anything away. Look at everything 4 times and email me.
Yeah, I could see how that would be extremely overwhelming if you were facing hundreds of boxes with a small volunteer team. So
Yes.
I understand that question,
Yes.
and all that's a part of that question. So I thank you for offering to help. I'm sure that's appreciated. So there were 2 questions that were sort of similar in the chat, and they both have to do with, I guess, the younger generation and things being lost due to the way that we currently communicate digitally. So the first comment says, younger generations like my young adult children are determined not to keep anything, not essential, not functional, and want everything in the virtual world only. How can we help to change this mindset so present things are preserved for the future? This is from Ruth, and Ruth is a former history teacher, and she's concerned.
One of the things that I do myself, so it may not look like it behind me, but I do like the idea of minimalism, except for when it comes to Legos, books, and art. Those all things bring me joy, so I'm definitely holding on to them. But there are some things. So there's an image that I used in my presentation. It was the news article of me digging in the trench. I know I have a copy of that somewhere in my stuff. I can't find it online easily. And it is something that people, as technology advances, the tendency to think, oh, well, it's online, is just a common refrain that you can hear. It absolutely is not. In Texas, especially in Amarillo, we have these really great microfilmed newspaper resources. So we at the museum have it, but there's this gap between 1979 and 1997 that we have sporadic newspapers. We don't have them all. Neither does the publisher. And so the idea that if kids are wanting to get rid of things that just so they're not burdened down, then that's okay. It's a matter of how and why do we need to save what we save. Once we have a copy of things, then do we need to have 4 copies rather than the 1? Where can these things be accessed at? If you have a ticket stub collection of all of the movies that you watched at the Gem Theater in Plainview, Texas, I guarantee you somebody's going to want to see that one day. But your kids may not be that interested in it because they're just stubs and pieces of paper. So the more that we're able to engage with our families and explain why these things are important to us and how they are a part of not only our story, but our story, right? So not just the family story, but the bigger story, then it does become a sort of a conduit that's one of my favorite words, is conduit to to getting those things, those objects and information from the past into the hands of people that preserve and present. That's our jobs at the museums, right? Is to preserve, but also very specifically to present that information and give people the information that they need to know that it is vital to hold on to those things, because we don't want this to be a dark age. And one of the things that I actually do, and I probably shouldn't, but I do it anyway, I scare teenagers about text messages and emails, and I tell everyone that if there's a Carrington event, we're all going to be in pretty big trouble, because we could lose every ounce of our digital data in a heartbeat. And they look at me like I'm crazy, but the Carrington event is it's something that is very catastrophic and very big picture. But the idea that if you don't have a backup of any of our paper stuff, we will lose all sorts of information. So stressing the importance of preservation for posterity, I think really does make a big difference whenever it comes to your kids, or passing these down to generations, or even in institutions. What do you save and what do you not? Those are very, very tough questions, and sometimes the answers are very hard. But stressing the importance usually does help to make sure that we want our story told. We want our now to make it to the future. So I think that might help. Hopefully, with some students, email me. I'll talk to them.
She'll convince them.
Yeah, I'll get on the soapbox. I carry it around with me.
I love that. Well, I do love this idea of giving it context, right? That if the object has more context, then the story is bigger. Yeah, I understand that, and I think so much of the work in the historic preservation community is about that storytelling at its heart. That storytelling is everything. And it's sometimes we take for granted what stories we've told, like we think we've told them, but people change, we change, and kids change, and maybe we need to retell them at some point.
Yeah, and our memories change significantly. That's why I like the analogy of a tapestry, because if we lose those threads, the more threads we lose, the more threadbare the image gets, and the less we can actually make sense of the large picture.
A similar question, it was from Robin. Are y'all hearing me okay? I've got something says I have an unstable internet connection. Okay, yeah. I hope I'm coming through okay. So Robin was saying, I'm concerned with so much digital correspondence, so kind of following in the same line, and the absence of writing on paper, thinking of all the preserved paper documents from years ago. Will people be able to find tweets, texts, blogs 100 years from now? So it's in line with what we were just talking about. So.
Right. And that's something that archivists are actively trying to answer. That's a question that we are currently engaging with as well as we can to make sure that we're able to answer those questions. How do we get that communication? There's some ethical questions in there as well, but there's a whole nother topic.
Sure. Yeah. So Daniel is saying, considering that saving occurred in the 1930 to 1920 period, sorry, I misspoke. Considering that saving occurred in the 1830 to 1920 period, how does ethnicity, country of origin, immigrant history, and religion influence the women? What trends or patterns have you discovered?
Oh, that's actually a really good one. And this saving of the West, it's continuing. It's ongoing now. And so one of the women that I have got that I'm in communications with right now, she's a friend, she's the president for the Amarillo chapter of the NAACP. And she is also, they have a historical center that we are talking about doing oral histories in. So not only do we think about the way women saved the West, past tense, but currently saving it, because we're going to train oral historians to capture the tales of things that are going on in the 30s, 40s, 50s, so we can tell those stories later on and have those viewpoints from those people that are lived through civil rights movements and through integration periods. The earlier time periods, there are surprisingly a large population that we know of immigrants and of minority, quote unquote, minority populations. Technically, it was one for one for everybody for all. And it was a very much a big, it was, this area, especially the Panhandle-Plains region, was very cooperative in that if you didn't cooperate, you weren't going to survive. And so the appearance of minorities, of people with different ethnicities, countries of origin, they appear in many stories, but we don't have their voices. That's one of the things that I'm still trying to locate. If I can find families that have an oral tradition, that's the kind of material that we need to still continue to collect so we can get these stories and get them part of that tapestry and get that bigger picture finished out as best we can. But those voices are there. They're very quiet, or in some cases they are non-existent, but I don't ever give up hope that we can't possibly find those in the future. But they're quiet. Those voices are quiet, but we're gonna find them, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see, get to my next one. Oh, this one's a really good question, and I think it's hard to answer. How do archivists decide what's important and what's not important to keep? Or is everything important?
That is a really good question, and some of us are better at this than others. I am a keeper. I said that before, and I am a diligent keeper. So I like to keep everything if I possibly can. But what really has to do with uniqueness and rarity. Is this particular thing rare, or is there several copies of this particular magazine? And we might not need to say this one. Is this the only letter that we have of, from whenever a grandparent was writing another grandparent in the war? In Willa Grace Erdman's picture that I used this evening, she was a diarist. She wrote in her diary every single day, and that particular diary entry that was open throughout the exhibit was the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. We have her thoughts on the nation-changing moment right there in front of us. And so that's what's important. It's those rare and unique things that don't have that we don't get the chance to just capture some other way. So rare and unique is often a driving force.
So there was an answer. I love that. Okay, let's see. There's so many thank yous to you for your presentation in the chat. I hope you have a chance to scroll through it before things are done today. Lisa says, thank you. I have so much content from my family to save and figure out where it can go. Teddy says, thank you.
And I would like to add too, for people like Lisa that say, I've got so much content from my life that I've saved and a place for it to go. I'll have people come in and I'll show them scrapbooks of people that were doing things in the 20s and the 30s. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. They don't want my stuff. You are wrong. You are absolutely wrong. I'm talking to you now as an archivist. We want your stuff. We want to be able to tell those tales, because a photograph can talk to us about fashion. It can talk to us about ecological, economical, socio interactions. There's so much that we can learn from scrapbooks and from letters and just anything, especially primary source documents. Those types of things. That's how our history books are written, is by using those sorts of things. So just because you didn't live in the 1920s and your scrapbook isn't 100 years old yet, one day it will be. And it will be as important to someone 100 years in the future as the ones are that we look at today are to us. Don't forget how important you are in the historical narrative, because we're all a part of it. Again, soapbox, sorry.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's inspiring. I think a lot of the messaging that we hear from, in our lives is clean that up, don't save that thing, and it's sometimes hard, I think, to see our personal stories as having value. And that's, that's our humanity, and that's our, our place in the universe, as it were. So it's interesting for me to hear you say that someone will find that interesting. I think that's a thing we forget sometimes. Even if it's not our own children, because I too have an adult daughter who doesn't save very many things, so I understand that. Okay, we have another question. I'm trying to make sure I don't skip any questions here. Let me see. For those of you who are asking for the resources that Renee mentioned, including her email, that will be in the email I send out tomorrow, so don't worry. This is sort of a similar question about newspaper clippings. How do I assess piles of newspaper clippings? And if there's an original digital copy somewhere, then what?
Yeah, that's very tough. So newspaper clippings, I have, my experience with newspaper clippings has changed dramatically in the past. Well, I've been doing this for 11 years now with Scott. And so I initially thought, oh, well, that's fine. Everybody's got access to these newspapers. That is not true. So when you're looking through newspaper clippings, one of the things is that I would suggest, it's also an archaeological trick or method. Don't get things out of order until you know why they're in that order. So if there's absolutely no order and you can't ever establish an order, then you can rearrange things. But until you are for sure that there's no order, don't get them out of order, because they may actually be in date order and you don't know it. And so keeping an eye out for, what kind of clippings are being saved. So are they all obituaries? Are they all announcements of family members? If they are those types of things, then, and especially if somebody wrote on them and wrote the date, bless them, and you say thanks to them as many times as you can, because that's a tremendous boon. But you may gather those things together and organize them. So this is our families, these are the obituaries of our family members, or these are all of the things in this particular person's life. This is their obituary, this is their wedding announcement, this is their award that they won. It depends on how many of what you've got, or how often their family member was in the newspaper. It depends on several things, but that sort of technique or archival arrangement type stuff is something that just has to come with looking at the material. So I always say, look through everything once and then go back and look at it again, because whenever you do this, you're going to look at it more than 4 times for sure. Especially if it's family, you're never going to go through it once and be done. And it's possible, it's just not going to be that handy to find it later. And that's the reason why we do what we do, is so we can find it later when someone says, oh, well, do you have this picture? Yes, I know exactly where that's at. But there's piles and piles of newspaper clippings. There are some websites that have digital copies of newspapers. They are always behind a paywall. You always have to pay in order to see them. You might be able to go to your local library and they can help you look in their archives and their research facilities. At the museum, you can come and you can ask us if we got a microfilm copy, and and to see if there is a copy that exists outside of what you've got. But I would honestly not, I wouldn't risk throwing those away because we may not even have them, especially if they're from the 80s and 90s in Amarillo I mean, and I'm sure there are gaps in other publishers as well. But also, it's really nice to have it all centralized, to be honest. You don't have to go searching. But one thing that I would recommend is putting it all in one place and as safe as you can, not on the floor, not in the attic, because moisture gets in and that sort of thing, but have it all in one place. So don't have your tubs of pictures in 4 different closets. Try to put them in one place. That helps. It helps in the long run tremendously, and it helps to remind you too that maybe you need to pay, just a little bit of attention and put some names on the backs of things. Write things down. You will not remember who those people are later, I promise. Always write down who those people are, and don't use initials. that's another one. Don't use initials. Right. You won't remember.
That's a really good comment right there. So there are a couple of questions regarding cost, that saving and valuing things costs money. How can we find resources for preservation for our collections? How do we assess resources and funding to save the stories and the collections? And I think this might be Palladuro, if you want to come off mute, and I'm not sure if you're asking on behalf of an organization or on behalf of a private collection, but if you want to come off and ask your question, come off mute and ask your question, please do.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
I've inherited a lot of family things, but I'm also a member of the board at the Armstrong County Museum. And from time to time, small collections come to us in boxes, on tapes, typed notes, and our resources are so limited to get those into the larger picture. Where are or how can we access resources that will help fund the preservation of those resources and put them on a stick or put them on a website or wherever is appropriate in today's world?
So yeah, there are some really great grant programs. There's 2 that I'm going to tell you about specifically, and I can make sure to have her, Christy, link these tomorrow too, if you'll also remind me, Christy, because my brain's sort of like a sieve. But the University of North Texas, they are the ones that take care of the Portal to Texas history. I'm sorry, Portal to Texas history. That's correct. And they currently have a grant application open right now, and they are looking for material to digitize that will then go on to the Portal of Texas history, and they digitize it for you, and you just send them the material. We at PPHM, we've done this before with them. And so I've got some things that I'm trying to get that I may apply to have digitized there too. But they go through the entire state, people will apply, and then these things are added to the Portal to Texas history. And then there's another place, especially for videotapes or reel-to-reels, the Texas Moving Image Archive. They just recently did a roundup, and you could send them your material and then they would digitize it, send you the digital copy, and then they would also include it in their archives and give access to it within their own collection as well. So utilizing the desire and the need for other people's collection building and putting things on their websites, that will help in those for smaller. I'm working off of $0 in income as far as the Scott Hyde Archive and the archive at large is concerned. So I have to try to find these things as well. So I have some letters that I'm going to be submitting to University of North Texas from a private archive at large standpoint. But then also the museum has some microfilm that needs to be done because they're ranch records that don't exist anywhere else. But yeah, there's really grant programs, and then having people. I've been on the board for Habitat for Humanity, and we've raised funds by building, people can buy a brick, so you can sponsor a brick. I've had people sponsor boxes for the archive at large in the past. And so if you need rehousing things, or if you need a particular job or task done, you might reach out to your patrons and say, all right, we need 4 new document boxes, and each one of those things are $20 a piece. Can anybody sponsor a doc box? And you might be surprised at how many people will step up, and you'll get the resources you need to provide that for your organization.
Thank you, Renee. I've used
You're
both
welcome.
the North Texas portal,
Oh, good.
and I speak highly of it, and also the Texas Moving Picture as
Good.
well. One thing with the portal, for example, the Claude News is hit and miss some days, some weeks, some months, some years. And when you're trying to track something, say from the 1930s, it's really irritating that I can't find the whole story.
It is. And the more we get the more we get it on these sorts of platforms, rather than like on the newspapers.com or newspaperarchives.com behind paywalls, then the better it is, because I think that people should support the history and the way that we get our history, and we shouldn't have to pay to find it. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the way it all goes right now, but that's also why I will never make enough money to ever actually like do anything crazy, because I'm going to spend all of it archiving things for people at large. But I'm glad that you use those resources. And right now, the application's open through August, so you may look into applying for something new.
Thank you so much, Renee.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So this is just a quote, or sorry, not a quote, but a comment from Rusty Acres Homestead. As a quilt historian, I can affirm those pieces of information are valuable. I find clues from the quilts, diaries, local events, church records, etc.
Yeah,
and there was
absolutely. Quilts
one
are
other,
one of the coolest to see.
Oh, so yeah. PBS had a really great show about quilt making and craft in America, and it was all the process of preserving family stories in the quilts themselves. I love all of that. I just had 2 comments I think we're done with questions, but there were 2 comments I wanted to share with you before we close out today. One of them was from Nora, who says, inspiring presentation that validates what we women think are precious items and that we save for the future. Thank you. And then Pamela says, thank you for this. She's had to clean out houses of relatives, and knowing what to do with all the stuff is overwhelming. Yes, I'm sure. I've been there too, Pamela. It is overwhelming.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Renee. Thank you for our audience for being here tonight. And once again, look for my email tomorrow. If you don't see it, check your spam or junk folders, or you could just reach out to me. I will go ahead and put my email in the chat right now.
And I do see one other question that was about photocopies of newspaper articles. Do they last as long, or do they fade? It depends on the copies. It depends on what the copy is made on, but a copy is better than nothing. And the newspaper, especially if it's fading or fragile, if it's starting to deteriorate, if you can get it between a couple pieces of mylar, so like that plasticky kind of stuff that's like the page protectors, that'll help it from deteriorating as fast. But that's for true newspaper print. But newspaper photocopies of newspaper, it just depends on what it's copied on, because sometimes the ink actually will stick to other pieces of paper. Sometimes they fade, especially if they were mimeographed. There's all sorts of problematic things with paper in general, but best thing is to have the original and a digital backup. So take pictures, but always keep the original.
Yeah. Keep everything is what she's saying. Keep everything. All right. Thank you so much again. And
It's my pleasure.
we're glad to have you, and I hope we can have you again in the future sometime. We'd love to talk about archives. This is
Yeah.
this has been
Yeah,
fantastic.
we've got there's a lot to talk about in the world of archiving and saving in general. So yeah, it'd be happy to be back again.
And
Thank
you
you
guys
for
go
letting me
visit the
visit.
Panhandle-Plains Museum. Get up there and say hello to Renee in person. I'm sure she would love that.
Yeah, third floor. Come up and see me in the archive. Yes, keeps me from
And
just being up there by
register for
myself.
the next Friends virtual event,
Mhm.
the Painted Churches of Texas 2, part 2. We're excited about that next month, and we'd love to see you there. So take care, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.